We do want to focus in on Carney's comments about the war, though, specifically the federal government's response to it. And for that, I want to bring in Fen Hampson. He is an international affairs professor at Carleton University, and we've reached him in Ottawa. Thanks so much, Fen, for joining us.
Good to be with you, Sarah.
So let's start with this. Canada, we're hearing, is looking to support Gulf states while not actually being involved in Operation Epic Fury. I mean, just say, is it possible to dip a toe, as it were, into this conflict this way?
Well, I think what the Prime Minister is trying to say, Sarah, is he's signaling some flexibility for a limited defensive or supporting role, but at the same time, he doesn't want to drag Canada into core combat operations that are now underway. You could say that he's kind of tying himself into a pretzel, sending a signal to the Americans, to our allies, that we'll stand by you. We'll always defend Canadian interests, but he definitely does not want to be dragged into military operations against either Iran or Lebanon.
Okay, I want to ask you about that pretzel approach in a moment here, but if Canada does get involved in this conflict in this way that we're talking about, supporting the Gulf states, what might it look like?
Well, I think this would only happen if the conflict is prolonged and the regional security picture deteriorates for Gulf partners or for U.S. forces, which become overstretched protecting U.S. bases. Historically, Canada has sometimes said no to joining a main combat mission while providing quiet support in the theater. As we did in 2003 in the Iraq War, we assigned naval vessels to assist U.S. patrols in the Arabian Sea just outside the Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz. I could see a realistic request for Canada to play a similar kind of role, particularly to enforce sanctions against Iran, maritime interdiction operations against smugglers who are trying to get materiel to Iranian forces. So there is a role there, but as the Prime Minister said, right now there's no ask from Washington.
Okay, so let's talk about this idea of being a pretzel here, the idea that the Prime Minister is both, expressing some support, but also distancing himself from Donald Trump. What do you think America wants to see from Canada?
Well, right now, I think, they're not really thinking about Canada. Carney, I should say, President Trump has directed his ire against the British for not letting them use their bases for U.S. military operations. But I think, as I said earlier, if this goes on, the conflict continues, the Americans will start leaning on their allies, including Canada, to provide some form of support.
And if that support is not there, if there is not this, if it is not forthcoming when that call comes, what does that do to the relationship between Carney and Trump?
Well, I think Carney is trying to steer a very fine line here. On the one hand, he does not want to antagonize Donald Trump any more than he already has since his Davos speech, where it was pretty clear he was criticizing the Americans. He doesn't want to put the CUSMA talks in jeopardy, but at the same time, so he's saying he's leaving that hypothetical open and not openly criticizing the Americans. But at the same time, it's pretty clear that any kind of Canadian involvement in a combat role would not sit well with Canadians, particularly since this operation lacks a clear UN authorization. It would be highly controversial. It would face significant not only public but also parliamentary resistance. And I think it's fair to say, Canadians have historically distinguished between UN-sanctioned collective security operations. They tend to draw more support than an ad hoc U.S. intervention of the kind we're seeing now. So, that's why, Carney's being very careful there. Obviously very frustrating to the media who are trying to get a straight answer from him, as we just saw in that press conference in Japan.
Beyond the moral arguments that you might hear from many in Canada, do you think that, or are you concerned about risk to Canadians either at home or abroad, given the kind of retaliation that we have seen on the part of Iran toward any countries supportive of the United States?
I think it's a real risk. There are Iranian operatives here in Canada. I think we should be under no illusion that by right now staying out of kinetic operations in the Gulf, we're not a potential target for terrorist operations, either directed at Canadians abroad, against our embassies abroad, or for that matter, here in Canada. I think we have to be very realistic. As we've seen, Iran is lashing out at all allies of the United States in the theater of operations. They're attacking the Gulf states. They did not start this conflict. They're trying to drag others into the conflict in the hope that this will put pressure on Donald Trump and the Israelis to stop these military operations. So we really do have to stand on guard at this pivotal moment in world history.
Fen Hampson, Professor of International Affairs at Carleton University. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.